Welcome to another episode of the Doctors and Dollars podcast, where we discuss health insights and wealth secrets. I'm your host, Nate Crannell, joined today by Dr. Brooke Jeffy. Dr. Jeffy, a Louisville, Kentucky native, founded the first and only direct care dermatology practice in Arizona in 2022. Direct Care allows Dr. Jeffy to combine medical dermatology, skincare, and lifestyle modification strategies to help her patients achieve skin wellness. Her knowledge, approachable nature, and transparent practice create a unique dermatology experience. Dr. Jeffy is a self-described health fanatic with the mission of teaching her youngest patients the importance of skin and overall health. In that spirit, she founded BTWN, a skincare line and brand for tweens and teens, which launched in August of 2023. Welcome to the show, Dr. Jeffy. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
You bet. What's going well today?
Had a great day in clinic. Took care of some fun people. Had some good discussions about New Year's, and already people starting off on discussing their resolutions and where they are in that.
Absolutely. You probably had the rush leading up to the end of the year. I imagine you're like a lot of physicians that I talk to where everyone has filled their health insurance quota, right? And they're right near the end of the year. It's like, all right, well, now it's kind of covered. But we're going to talk today. You might not have that as much.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to say, no, I do not really have that.
Yeah, which
Not
is a good thing.
participating in insurance. Yes, exactly. So I was actually able to take some time off, but still be there for my patients with my kind of the unique way I do things is they can really always get a hold of me.
That is awesome. What were the unique resolutions that you heard today, if there were any?
I don't, well, okay. One unique resolution was actually in a young teen patient who was in to see me and was excited to tell me that he was ready to start being consistent about washing his face and using sunscreen. So I thought that was awesome. A great thing made me happy to hear at the start of the year.
Exactly. Way to turn a quarter. I mean, I remember being a teenage boy, and that was the last thing I wanted to do was put on sunscreen or do any type of skincare routine. I just thought that was for girls, and I was just like, no. And then, you break
Yeah.
out and you have the acne, and you're like, well, I'm a teenage boy, I get acne, and then it doesn't have to be the case. So yeah, that is
Doesn't have.
exciting.
Yeah.
You bet.
Yeah. But then, just the normal things and people already telling me they've broken them as well. So, it's the usual.
Yeah, I was talking with a potential investor today, and we were scheduling a happy hour together. And he's like, "Hey, can we do it for later in January? I'm doing like a 15-day dry January." And he gave me the dates. He's like, "I'm doing it January 3rd to the 16th." And I'm like, "Why the 3rd?" He's like, "Well, I already had a drink at lunch today, so I broke dry January on January 2nd." Like, all right, it happens. They're
Yeah,
tough.
it is. I don't know. Resolutions are, I guess they're good, but to have a goal, but being so rigid, it just sets you up for failure and that's not good.
Yeah, I'm not a resolution guy. I'm more of like a pick a word or a few words that are kind of like your mantra for the year, and then you just always think about those and then do whatever it takes to stick with those words throughout the year.
I like it.
Versus, well, I'm going to lose 10 pounds, or I'm going to, a couple of years ago, I said I'm going to read like 2 books a month, and I think I read 2 books for the whole year. Like it's just things like that just don't stick with me, I guess,
Yeah.
for sure. So, getting started, you completed your medical school and your residency in the state of Kentucky. So, tell me
I
about
did.
the journey from there to now being in Arizona. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I did do all my training in Louisville, where I'm from, and I did practice there for a year, but decided I wanted to make a change and really had never lived anywhere outside of the state. My in-laws live here in Cave Creek, which I don't know how familiar
Mhm.
you are with Arizona, but it's north of Scottsdale. And so we wanted to be sure we went to a place where we had some family because we had a 3-year-old or almost 3-year-old at the time. So decided to give it a try out here. So moved out this way for a job. So really like it. Lots to offer here. Obviously, a great place to be a dermatologist, particularly if you really like dealing with skin cancers.
Mhm.
An older population with a lot of sun damage. So been here and practicing since, and love living here.
So, did you open? So, as I mentioned in your bio, Arizona's only direct care concierge dermatology practice. Did you open that right away when you came down, or has that kind of morphed as you've been there longer?
Yeah, I was employed here most of the time for one practice. I have worked for two practices since I've been out here, but the first one was
Mhm.
only for about 2 years. The rest of the time, I worked for another large practice, which ultimately, I mean, I was very happy with, but ultimately they sold to a private equity group and sort of declined in spectacular fashion. And that is really what prompted me to kind of move on and do my own thing after some experiences I had sort of with that transition. Really wanted to be able to provide care for patients the way I felt needed to be done, and
Mhm.
just to provide a better experience for both patients and myself.
Absolutely. So we alluded to that kind of at the beginning. So you are not an insurance based practice. Excuse me. It's more cash based, which I
Correct.
think is where the concierge dermatology practice comes into play. Tell me, was there a series of events? Was it kind of that transition that you just talked about that said, "Hey, man, for this to work well for my patients, I want to go cash based," or was there kind of that? What was that defining moment that was like, "This is how I'm going to run my practice"?
Yeah, I mean, I have it's always been a little bit of a struggle, particularly really in more recent years, as more of a holistic type of approach has been discovered to have some relevance for a lot of dermatology conditions. So, a lot of conditions can be affected by diet and, our stress levels, how well we're able to care for ourselves. And I was definitely not able to have the time to speak to my patients about that in a traditional practice where, you're spending like 7 minutes usually with patients. So that was a problem that I was feeling, that I was basically leaving a lot off the table that I could help my patient, that I was not able to get to with my patients. And then just with all the changes that ended up happening when the practice I was with sold, I just decided, that was just kind of the kick that I needed to move on. But I knew that in order to be able to apply that more holistic approach, I would not be able to do it in a traditional practice setting based on insurance. So I call it concierge in some of the language that's out there. I mean, really, it's fee for service or direct pay. But I think a lot of kind of potential patients out there, it's easier for them to wrap their head around the term concierge. I mean, they kind of right away get, well, that means cash. A lot of primary care doctors, doing this too, more with membership based models, which is not something that I am currently doing. I don't think it makes as much sense in dermatology. So it's basically fee for service.
For sure. When you say it doesn't make sense in the dermatology world, is that just because of the broad scope of what it is that you offer? I mean, primary care can be kind of the same, right? There could be just about anything you could see your primary care provider with. How does that translate to dermatology? Is it just the extensive amount of offering that you have that doesn't quite make sense that way?
Well, it can make sense for maybe a few conditions, but for a lot of conditions, I just don't have to see patients that often. So, like if it's somebody that is wanting skin cancer screening, I might see them once or twice a year. There are a few conditions that I think it can make sense for, like acne. If someone is, if we're just starting to treat to get someone's acne under control, that can be more frequent visits. Sometimes patients who are on Accutane, for example, they come in monthly for at least 6 months. So that is something I've thought about doing as more of a membership. But at this point, I don't think it's a must, and I like people to just be able to have the option of coming in when they want to. But it may be something that I could expand to doing more in the cosmetics aspect of it potentially. I know there's a lot of people that do that, but yeah, I just think there's those differences.
Yeah, more the chronic reasons why people would come to see you versus the I think of like when I think of a dermatologist, I went to one when I was younger. It's like, hey, I have a mole that's gotten a little bit darker over the last couple of years. Let's take this thing off. It's like that's kind of a one and done thing. I'm not going to come
Yeah,
in every month or yeah.
right.
So that makes sense.
Exactly. Hmm.
So tell me about the cosmetic side as you're thinking about some of those ideas and where that might fit into your practice with the subscription based. What are some of the cosmetic things that you're doing in your practice?
Yeah, so in my practice, I do a lot of chemical peels. I do microneedling and some laser procedures, Botox, of course,
Mhm.
injectables. It's honestly not really the goal that I had when I created the practice. I mean, I've always primarily been medical dermatology, which is really what I love doing. But with the nature of my practice now being cash pay, it is a younger type of crowd that has it's sort of evolved to, and those patients have wanted cosmetic procedures. So I've had to pivot a little bit to include more of those. So maybe looking into what sort of memberships, I mean, really the point I think of doing it with cosmetics is that you keep your patients from exploring other practices, for example, right? Like you're trying to encourage them to keep coming back to you. So there's options in terms of, Botox, microneedling, things like that, that could hopefully just keep people in-house and not shopping around.
Yeah, you literally answered the next question I was going to have already. Was just, does it make sense to pivot? But in your sense, it's like, yeah, if I want people to continue to see me, and a lot of that necessarily isn't selfish for you to say that.
Mhm.
It's just more, yeah, if they go see somebody else, they're not going to get as good of an experience. Might not get the right care. They might go somewhere where it's a third of the price, but they're getting the third of the service, right? It's just not as good. So I think that's valid to
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, also to keep things more in house. I mean, yes, I think once my patients see me, they definitely appreciate the ability to easily get a hold of me. On the weekends, they can send me a text if there's a question. If it's something that we need to hop on a virtual appointment for, we can do that. But when I was not offering any cosmetics, it felt it didn't feel like the right thing to be saying, oh, well, you need to go to this practice. And yes, they take insurance. And, it's kind of like you don't necessarily want that exposure. But again, once they have it, patients do really they kind of stick with me. But it
Mhm.
is a bit of a learning or more of an education type of thing, hurdle that we have to get over to acquire patients. That's, of course, different from a traditional practice.
Yeah. Well, I think the pivot is good. And correct me if I'm wrong, with Scottsdale is becoming a younger crowd.
Mhm.
I think people our age is more of the common age in Scottsdale versus maybe 30 years ago. That was not the case. That generation has moved on, as you might say. But
Yeah,
Scottsdale was an older city that I think more of the older population has moved to the outer edges of the
very true.
Phoenix metro. Yep.
Hmm.
So very good pivot. I think that's great. Talk about the skin line between. So for those just listening, BTWN, take out all the vowels, right? BTWN skincare line for tweens and teens. I mean, we were just talking about a younger population, more our age, but now you're going way young. You're going our kids' age. What attracts you to that age group?
Yeah, this was sort of a long time brewing. Not sure if you've chatted with anyone else who's created a skincare line before, but
Nope.
bringing these products to market is not just you have the idea and next week you can have it. It's about 2.5 years of going through, branding and decided, the voice, the mission, formulating products with a chemist, figuring out the manufacturing situation. I mean, it was, I mean, I'm still learning every day, but it was just an incredible process. But basically, I started noticing probably about 3 to 4 years ago, just in my practice, more and more younger kids were coming in. Their parents were bringing them in. Maybe they weren't breaking out a little bit, but they also just brought them in or would mention at their appointments, hey, what should I do with my teen, my young teen, my tween? Should they be washing their face? Do they just need to use water? They had questions. I was just noticing this more and more. And there was a white space in the market. I mean, sure, there are products at the drugstore that, dermatologists commonly recommend, I commonly recommend, but nothing that was really specific to them. And it's been very interesting. Really, this year, there has been quite a few brands come to market, mine included, that I honestly, I mean, I had no idea that's how things were going to play out. I had no idea these things
Sure.
were going on. It just, I guess other people were seeing the same trends.
Well, you mentioned using like the adult products that you can pick at the
Mhm.
drugstore. If a parent was going to use that on their tween or their early teen, they probably just use it in moderation, like less. So is chemically are your is the between line, is it just a little bit softer from a chemical standpoint to allow for that type
So
of younger skin?
The Physicians Financial Summit is coming to Chicago in 2024. Now, the Physicians Financial Summit is probably exactly the opposite of what you think it is. I'm sure you've gotten a free dinner and went to an event where a financial advisor shared a few things and tips and tricks. That's not what this is. You're not going to get a free dinner, unfortunately, and we are not financial advisors. This is going to be an action-packed 2 days where we break down the exact playbook that I used that allowed me to retire at the age of 33 and is going to guarantee that you are prepared and ready for a prosperous retirement. Now, there's way too much info that I can cover in this video, but I will promise you two things. One, this is going to change your life forever. And two, we are going to make this much simpler than you realize was possible. Just like you break down important and complicated medical stuff for us as patients, we're going to do the same for you. So, if talking about money would make you want to pull your hair out, this is not the event for you. But if you want to see behind the scenes of how the wealthy prepare their financial futures and what you can do to be better prepared financially, then we will see you there in March 2024, Chicago.
yeah, so there are a lot of products that are on the market that are great for younger skin, fragrance free, primarily just hydrating, basic cleansers and moisturizers. So there's a lot of those that are very safe that are on the market from trusted brands. But there are, of course, lines that are more specific for adults. And just like you said, you actually need to be cautious about using those in kids because there's some
Mhm.
active ingredients that are not ideal for their skin. What I was noticing is that parents almost kind of wanted something specific, created for their kids, and their kids wanted that. So
Mhm.
while I could easily say, go get this brand, this cleanser, whatever, they wanted something that felt a little more special, more honestly just marketed to them. And so that's what
Sure.
Between is. It is, I want it to be fragrance free. It's great for, or want, I should say, I wanted it to be fragrance free, great for sensitive skin. I wanted it to be really supportive of a great skin barrier, which helps the skin be more resilient against acne, and then also more able to deal with environmental stressors. So there's antioxidants in it, but is not, a lot of the brands out there now that are made for kids, they have a lot of scent and essential oils and extracts and things that, may do something, but largely probably not well researched and have a lot of potential for irritation. So I wanted this brand to be good for young skin, tolerable, something dermatologists could feel good about, but also parents, and that kids would enjoy using, appeal to them.
Yep. And this might be getting into the weeds a little bit, but is it, yes, being marketed to teens and tweens? There's an appeal there, right? To say, hey, this is a skincare line for me. I don't have to go use my mom's stuff, right? Is there a difference in skin between, I want to say, an 11-year-old who hasn't quite hit that acne phase yet, and the kind of the chemical makeup of their skin and the products that they need to use, versus, let's say, a 14 or 15-year-old who is, the hormones have already started to change, the acne has already started. Is there a difference in your line there, or is it just, hey, you got to use a little bit more when you turn 14?
Yeah, well, right now, the focus of my line and kind of just getting started was to keep things very simple. So there's just
Hmm.
two products, a cleanser and a moisturizer, and good
Sure.
for any skin type. So good for more sensitive, but also good if you do have a little bit more oily, kind of you're starting that early puberty type of phase. It is not a line as of now that is specific for acne, acne skin. But the whole
Okay.
point really of going after marketing more for tweens and these younger teens is that encouraging them to get on a good routine so that a lot of the acne could be avoided is the idea. Because I do believe that being consistent with skincare is really important. And that if you can start that early before they start to have problems, I think that we can reduce those problems. But to answer your question, I mean, the differences are just like what you said. I mean, with puberty, you start to get a little more oil to the skin. The skin will get a little more tolerant to products. But even still at 14, like for example, my son is 14, he's getting some small early breakouts. It is a struggle to find something that doesn't make his skin really irritated and red. You know what I'm talking about? Just gentle, over the counter, targeted acne products. I mean, salicylic acid, benzoyl peroxide, those kind of over the counter products, they're still very irritating to his skin, even though he's obviously making a bit of oil and starting to have acne. So
Sure.
there's not a specific age where you can kind of cut these things off, but I would say teens and then the young teens, so maybe like 15 and younger, kind of what the line is targeting, and they kind of tend to be one group. And then when you're 16 and older, kind of feel like, you know, the skin is much more resilient, more tolerating of ingredients.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was just getting a little bit of PTSD there as you were talking, being a 14-year-old boy, the pimples start and the acne starts, and you're just like, oh my gosh, what do I do? How do I fix that? So totally understand.
My son and, you know, patients I see all the time, when it's very early, you know, these young teens with acne, often just starting to wash their face twice a day, use a moisturizer, be consistent with it, does a world of difference. So they don't even need targeted acne products really at that point. So that's really where between comes in.
Yeah, mine was played football growing up all the time, and so it was like the chin strap on my chin,
Yeah.
the pad on my forehead, and then you get done, and it's just like take a bar of soap, cover your whole body, and that was pretty much all I did. And so yeah, no, I totally get. I wish I knew then what I know now. So and this is just more out of curiosity, what's happening? You know, obviously I understand that it's puberty. Once that kind of starts, there's a bunch of different hormones that start to kick in, but
Mhm.
what happens with the skin, you know, let's say age 12 when that starts, to like you mentioned earlier, once you're kind of older than 16, your skin becomes more resilient. As you become an adult, you get less and less acne. Like what's happening physiologically or biologically in your body during that time frame?
Yeah, I mean, one thing, like I said, is the oil production. You know, your skin is going to tend to be a bit more dry and more sensitive when you're younger, and then that oil production kind of gives it a little bit more resiliency. But the other thing is just the thickness of the skin and how the skin turns over. So younger kids, their skin, the layers of cells of the skin, they're much thinner. So what happens though with age though is that cell turnover gets a bit more disorganized, and so the skin actually gets thicker, which again provides it more resiliency. But that's also part of the reason that or teens will start to get acne, is because when those cells are not turning over the same way, things are sort of unorganized, getting thicker, pores get clogged, and that's kind of the initial start of an acne lesion. And then just when hormones stop fluctuating as much, which is really kind of driving that oil production and this change in the way the cells turn over, when that sort of dies down as we get, you know, past puberty, toward the end of puberty, then most people, their acne will settle down. Although that's certainly not 100%. A large part of my practice is adults with acne. But I think there are definitely other drivers for those changes in terms of oil production, for example. So again, I don't know how far we want to go into this, but diet, stressors, our sleep, all of these things, believe it or not, actually contribute to our skin health and oil production as well.
Yeah. Well, we're diving into it because you actually just almost answered my next question, which was going to be, what are some things that tweens and teens and early young adults can even do to take care of their skin, other than obviously use the between line that you've started to create, the cleanser, the moisturizer. I imagine that you're going to be expanding the line outside of that. So aside from using your between line, what are some other things within their lifestyle that can help change that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the things that we all struggle with, but
Mm-hmm.
I I mean, for sure, our lifestyle choices are going to make more difference to our skin than anything you're going to put on topically. I mean, I'm not saying don't buy my products and don't use your, you know, your products, but you can't ignore the lifestyle part of it. So, you know, I definitely talk to kids or adults struggling with acne in my practice about what they're eating. There are definite drivers of that, some more significant than others. But for example, dairy is a very kind of agreed upon driver now for oil production. And then there's some that are a little bit lesser, but there's definitely some nutrition things to think about. Also, stress management. So talking to kids about exercise and the importance of sleep, right? They all want to, particularly as teenagers, they want to stay up late on their Xbox. And that really, has some negative effects on our stress hormones, which will drive a lot of negative processes in the skin. Kids don't really have to worry about alcohol, but that's something that definitely plays a role in the skin. Sugar definitely can drive acne and age-related changes. So there's a lot more to it that you can get into. And that's really where the holistic part comes into me, because I do want to talk to my acne patients and any other condition that I may be treating. If there's relevant lifestyle exposures, I want to be able to talk to my patients about it, because I think that's the bigger picture out there for their overall health.
Absolutely. So you talked about some of the things in let's say, a diet. That you talked about dairy, you talked about alcohol, and how those can be major drivers. What are some of the foods that can promote good skin health?
Yeah, I mean, what we pretty much all know we should be eating: fruits and vegetables.
The boring
Fruits and
stuff, Brooke? No.
Exactly. Fruits and vegetables, avoiding excess sugar, avoiding those processed foods like chips. But really, yeah, I mean, it's kind of what we all know we should be eating, but it's not the fun stuff. So it's a struggle for everyone. I always try to tell people, just steps in that direction. I'm not expecting anyone, myself included. I mean, I would love to say I'm 100% perfect with these things, but I am not. So it's all just baby steps. I mean, the world that we live in and the culture that we have with our nutrition and fast food and everything. I mean, any positive step you can make is a good one.
Man, when I was writing that question last night, I was really hoping that you were going to just blow my mind with something like, oh, you should drink more red wine. That double bacon cheeseburger is not that bad for you. That really helps your skin. That's what I was hoping you were going to say.
Yeah, I can't help you with that. Now, if you're going to drink alcohol, red wine would be the best choice.
Okay.
But I'm going to come down and say something that you're not going to like me to say. But, alcohol is definitely a known carcinogen.
Yeah, you're not. I knew that, but I heard that fact a while back, and I was like, I'm just going to erase that from my brain and act like I didn't
Sorry.
hear that.
But what's funny to me is that people will question a lot of the things that I recommend, or that just physicians in general or whatever may recommend. Oh, the risk of this. I'll give you an example, like Vaseline. I'll tell patients to use that, and then sometimes people fight back against it a little bit, or the whole argument that sunscreen causes cancer. And I try to put it into perspective for people and just kind of say, well, like, are you perfect in every other aspect of your life? Like, don't worry about putting Vaseline on, which again, I think is no problem. But, don't worry about that if you're ingesting alcohol, like the perspective there.
Absolutely. So let's talk about sunscreen, because I heard the same thing when I was growing up. It's like, don't put on sunscreen. It's actually worse for your skin than the actual sun is. Which, granted, again, you kind of grew up in the Midwest. I'm in Iowa. It's not sunny here all the time, so when it is sunny, you want to take advantage of it and and get that Iowa tan, right? So let's talk about sunscreen in the sense of, is SPF important? Is there certain brands that we should be looking out for because they've done it the right way? Explain that a little bit to me.
Yeah, I mean, so sun exposure is happening to you whether it's bright and sunny or not, and whether you're in the house or you're driving around. I mean, there's windows. If you're by one of those, you're getting exposure. If you're in the car, you're getting exposure through the windshield. So it really should be a year-round concern, regardless of where you live. The bad rep for sunscreen comes from some studies that showed that chemical sunscreens, so there's two main categories of sunscreens. There's chemical sunscreens, and then there are physical sunscreens. So it's easy to keep track of these, because basically physical sunscreens are things like zinc and titanium, easy words to pronounce. Everything else is a chemical sunscreen. Those chemical sunscreens have been shown in studies where rats were fed insane amounts of these, like fed over time, that they developed internal malignancies, some internal malignancies. So that's where this whole thing comes from. But the issue is that, and the other thing is that we know now, studies came out fairly recently, that you can measure some of these chemical sunscreens in your blood if you used sunscreen over a period of time in some of these studies. But these studies were done in such a way that it was very well controlled. So you're using X amount over a certain area very strictly, and then these levels were measured. In day-to-day normal use, nobody is using sunscreens like this. I mean, I guess if they were, we had this epidemic of people like using a bottle of sunscreen a day, but let's just honestly be real, that's not happening. So that's where that argument comes from. So it's easy though, if you are concerned about that risk, you just don't use the chemical sunscreens. You use the physical ones, zinc and titanium. These are the ones though that have been around a long time, and they can leave that white cast, but there's so many companies now doing so many great things with the formulation that they don't always act like that. You can definitely get ones that blend much better. And maybe men don't always want to do this, but tinting is good for sunscreens as well, and can certainly be used by men just to help them blend. But again, with the formulations, they're not all just leaving this huge white cast. But that's how you avoid that whole cancer risk thing, because 100% the sun causes skin cancer, and 80% of the damage that shows up as age-related changes, so brown spots and wrinkles, that is from sun exposure. So unless you're going to walk around with a ski mask on, you're going to have to use sunscreen if you want to negate that.
Totally makes sense. And my wife is always harping on me about sunscreen. I mean, I have a full head of hair, so I don't really see why I would need sunscreen on top of my head.
Please tell me you're wearing a hat at all times.
Yeah, no, I do put sunscreen. If we're going out to the beach, or we're going to be outside all day, it's usually on the top of my head and the top of my ears. But I'm also a guy that, if I can get a good tan, why not? But
don't tell me that. A tan is still a tan. I say is like your skin cells screaming for help. That's what your tan is. They are throwing up a little umbrella in the form of pigment so that they can protect the DNA in their inside of them from the damage. It's like their Hail Mary of trying to protect themselves is your tan. So that's all I have to say about that.
Is that kind of in line with, might be switching topics here, maybe not, but like, is that in line with moles? You see a lot of people who have like a lot of moles on their head or their shoulders or arms. Does a lot of that come from, constant skin or sun exposure throughout their life?
Some, but moles are also very genetic in nature for some people, just that tendency to have them. But definitely there tend to be more moles in more chronically exposed skin, but also more sunspots. And that is kind of the mechanism by which those happen.
Gotcha. So what are moles? That might be a broad question, but okay, two-part question. One, what are moles? Two, why do we get them?
Okay, so moles are benign proliferations, benign grouping of melanocytic cells. Melanocytes are the cells in our skin that make pigment. And so it's just sort of a proliferation in one area of them. Moles in and of themselves are nevi. They are benign. They can develop abnormalities, and it's those same cells, the melanocytes, that if they become cancerous, that's what a melanoma is. They're arriving from those same types of cells. Why they develop, I'm not sure that we have an answer for that. But the more moles you have, the more at risk you are of melanoma, for example.
Gotcha. My wife had heard, don't know where she was, don't know the source, so I can't quote anything or even if it's factual, but she'd heard if there's a grouping of moles somewhere in your body, let's say your shoulder develops a grouping of moles in a certain area, that could be a sign of toxicity in that area, whether it be in your skin. If you have a grouping of moles maybe on your torso, that maybe there's toxicity being held in your stomach or in your liver or your pancreas that is causing it. It's kind of that coming out through the skin. Is there any validity to that, do you think?
I I don't think there's any validity to that. I would say that it is possible that those areas maybe got some sort of more intense sun exposure over a
Mhm.
period of time, or, a sunburn, a drastic sunburn, for example, that could lead to a cluster of those popping up in an area. But no, I'm not aware of any evidence that it would be suggestive of something immediately underlying.
Got it. That makes sense. Would something coming out of the skin, like if that's what happens, I guess I should say, is that more in the eczema category, the psoriasis category? Is that
Yeah.
more of the what you would see from there?
Yes, exactly. So the conditions you mentioned, we think of as more they're inflammatory conditions. So things
Yeah,
like
that's the word I was looking for.
psoriasis,
Yep.
yeah, psoriasis, eczema, even acne. Um, so yes, we are learning more and more that inflammation going on internally can manifest like that on the skin. So this is where the whole gut, skin, even brain axis uh, discussion kind of comes in. I don't know if you are familiar with that, but this crosstalk between these organs we are realizing is more and more important, and this is a reason to talk to patients who have those conditions about taking care of their gut, treating it well, not eating inflammatory foods, so that they can see improvement in their skin conditions. So yeah, definitely relevant.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just having two daughters. So two of my three kids had eczema when they were younger. One we found was more of a gluten intolerance, and one was dairy. And
Hmm.
so it was more of just dialing back or completely eliminating those for an extended period of time. We noticed that cleared the eczema up
Yeah.
pretty well. And so, yeah, there's a lot of research done by dermatologists that we saw, by my wife, that was just, hey, that's an internal thing coming out. It's not
Hmm.
necessarily an external thing that's irritating the skin. That's what we thought at first when my middle
Right.
daughter really started breaking out with it on her thighs and her butt and stuff. We're like, man, what did she touch?
Yeah.
What did she get into? And then we kind of learned, oh, it's all internal, just coming
Yeah.
out. So,
And there definitely are forms of dermatitis that are from external sources, but eczema, or what we typically call it atopic dermatitis, so another form of
mhm.
dermatitis, but eczema has these combination kind of triggers. But there are like allergic dermatitis and irritant dermatitis, and those would be due to direct contact. So I do like to kind of clarify that, because I know a lot of people like to say everything is because of something inside, and I think to a large degree that's true, but there are definitely some things that are from the outside.
Absolutely. What is the difference then between eczema and psoriasis? To me, they look very similar on the outside, but what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, they're kind of two different pathways that lead to their production. I mean, they may look kind of similar to you, but really they're usually very easy clinically to distinguish between. But yeah, kind of different factors that lead to their development. Definitely treated somewhat differently in our approaches. Seen in different populations, usually, like you mentioned, your kiddo who had eczema. Definitely, we can see that in adults, but it's more common in kids. Whereas
Mhm.
psoriasis is kind of the other way, though still can be seen in kids.
Gotcha. And you always see those commercials, right? The psoriasis commercials, where it's rub the cream on and it goes away over time. Is that something that you see, not necessarily with your between line, but do you see some? Well, maybe with the between line, maybe there's another line that you create in the future that becomes more, I want to say, medically related, to some
Right.
of these things that, because I got to imagine that with psoriasis, that's one of the main treatments is some type
Mhm.
of topical cream or steroid that takes that away. Do you see your line expanding into something like that in the future?
I potentially do see maybe like body moisturizer, for example. But I don't know necessarily that I would specifically go after like a condition like eczema, for example.
Hmm.
But again, a large part of between for me is encouraging kids to be taking on the habits that can help them more long term. So kids with eczema, if they're using, being consistent with moisturizing and using gentle cleansers, that can go a long way. But I mean, in terms of like actually thinking about future products for between, I would think more about potentially something that's a little more specific for acne, going down that pathway.
Yeah, keeping it more cosmetic, less medical. The less time we can spend with the FDA is probably better.
I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, you get
Yeah.
into a very different product when you're talking about treating, even with some of the over the counter active ingredients in acne products, they're regulated more heavily. So yes, there's more steps to go through for sure.
Hmm. Let's talk about your practice a little bit. I know we're kind of circling back around, but just as we were talking about treating different age groups and medical versus cosmetic, what are the most common things that your concierge practice is seeing? What's kind of that age group that you're seeing the most? What are most of the topic popped into my mind? That's not it. A lot of the causes for people to come see you. What are the most common things that you guys are seeing? And if somebody's in the Arizona area and they say, "Well, man, I listened to this and I have that issue," they're coming to you because they know that that's something that your expertise lies in.
Yeah, I would say that I see a lot of diverse conditions where I think my practice and just my experience, really excels is conditions that are more chronic, like we talked about earlier. So rashes, psoriasis, eczema, hair loss, acne. I do some skin exams, but my focus, unlike a lot of other dermatologists, has it is not skin cancer care. So
Hmm.
I do skin exams, I do biopsies, I do treat some skin cancers, but that is not the focus of my practice, which is a very big difference, among traditional kind of insurance-based practices. I mean, most
Hmm.
derms, that is kind of their bread and butter because that's what you can get done fast. And obviously that's important, right? We don't want people to have problems with skin cancer. But these conditions that take a lot more time to manage is really, in my mind, where my practice offers the best choice.
Creates a lot of impact too, right? I mean, you're seeing more people for more of those chronic things versus, I mean, skin cancer is very relevant. A lot of people do seem to get
Mhm.
it, and it does need to be treated. I mean, that can be life changing as well. But the
Right.
impact that you can create in all of the other things outside of that skin cancer realm can be very impactful to a much larger population.
Exactly. And personally, I just have always felt more like, as a physician, more rewarded treating those conditions because you can really see a huge change often in a person's, like, just how, their self-esteem and how they interact in the world. I've had so many patients with eczema, acne, and psoriasis who, you can just totally see the change in how they interact with people, their confidence, when you improve their skin for them. And obviously taking care of someone's skin cancer that's growing there, they don't
Hmm.
like that. But it's a different thing. It's a different, these are conditions that maybe these people have been dealing with for many, many years and kind of like almost gotten hopeless about what they can do. And so that's just what I prefer treating. I mean, that's just a selfish thing maybe, but that's just what I enjoy treating. And my practice is now set up in a way that those patients can get this holistic approach to those conditions that they can't get easily elsewhere.
No, I think that's great because I mean, a lot of people might look at a dermatologist and say, okay, they're treating acne. That's a medical thing on the skin. That's very cosmetic or visual. But I
Mhm.
think you nailed it. Like the confidence factor that you are instilling in someone who you're helping them clear up their acne, especially as an adult. Like I know it's kind of a societal
Yeah.
norm that teenagers get acne. You
Yeah.
see you seen a 15-year-old and they have some pimples all over, and you're like, all right, they're just a kid. That happens. But when you
Yeah.
see a 42-year-old that has acne, you're like, man, are they just not washing their face or taking care of themselves? And a lot of time, that's a lot of that is their fault, right? We talked about earlier with the diet and the lifestyle and things
Hmm.
like that. But some of that might not be. Some of that might be genetic and external factors. And so to be able to clear that up for someone in their 40s, what a confidence booster. Like that just that boosts morale instantly.
Yeah, no, exactly. And honestly, that's probably the largest part of my practice is kids with acne, of course, is honestly probably the largest, but the second would be adults with acne, particularly adult women. I think there's a lot more adult men out there, but they just don't come forward with it, sadly.
Hmm.
But you're exactly right. And I mean, it's a different, because with teens, like they're all their friends, all most of their friends are going through the same thing, right? So
Mhm.
they are, I think, some of them may be less bothered by it, but adults, I mean, when you're trying to think about getting a new job and you have to give presentations at work, you're on camera at work, it's very distressing.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, you said a couple trigger words a few minutes
Mhm.
ago, so now I have to ask some questions on it. Hair loss.
Uh-huh,
I
uh-huh.
know I know most of that is genetic, right? I'm literally a spitting image of my dad. I look just like him. But what happens? Why did that start? I think that's my biggest thing. Like, do I need to go back like 7 generations back and yell at the guy that started the hair loss in my family, or what happens with hair loss? Is there a way to prevent it when you're younger to say, hey, my dad was bald, but like if I start doing
Yeah,
X, Y, and Z when I'm 14, I will keep my head of hair. I used to have a great head of hair in high school,
yeah,
Brooke. You probably wouldn't believe that, but how do you keep that around? Is there anything to help us
yeah.
bald guys out there?
Hair loss is a very evolving field right now. There
Hmm.
are a lot more treatments being used than ever before, like really just in the past few years. So there's a lot of medications as well as procedures in the cosmetic realm that can be very helpful for hair loss. But you have to start it early. But there's nothing to answer your question. I mean, there's nothing that you can really change that is going to at age 14, oh my gosh, my dad at 16 lost all his hair. There's nothing that you necessarily can do then other than if when you start to see the loss, that's when you have to start with some of these interventions. So that also means that these interventions are lifelong. So, I mean, if
Hmm.
you start taking an oral medicine that keeps your hair in place, you can't stop because you will lose it. So, that's definitely something that I always kind of struggle a little bit with because I do have younger patients, 20 and a little bit younger than that potentially who will come in to talk to me about hair loss and, we'll have all these discussions. But the good news is there are a lot of options, but it's not like they cure the problem. It's managing the problem.
Makes sense. No way to be proactive about it, but there is ways to your words, intervene if you
Yes.
wanted to. But that sounds like that's not finite. It's definitely lasting forever. So that makes sense. And Jessica, my wife, even asked me a couple weeks ago. She's like, one of our friends, he's Greek and has a fantastic head of hair, and she's like, "Do you think you would ever like want to have a head of hair like Matt has?" And I was like, honestly, no. Like if a genie came down and said, "Hey, I'm gonna grant you a wish about your hair," I would honestly make the wish be, I want a perfectly smooth head of hair that I never have to shave again, and then
Right.
make my beard grow better. Like I'm kind of at the age now in my mid 30s where it's like I'd rather have just a great thick beard than have more hair on my head.
Our wants change, right?
Yeah,
They
absolutely.
evolve. But there are definitely other types of hair loss. So certainly if someone is experiencing that early, it's always, I think, a good idea to get checked out, and be
Mhm.
sure that that's the right diagnosis because there's some other types of hair loss may have that have more specific treatments.
Yeah, is it different between men and women when it comes to hair loss? Is there different reasons?
No, I would say primarily it's still what we call androgenetic alopecia, the same type of genetic patterned hair loss. But what I was kind of alluding to was that there are some autoimmune forms of hair loss that
Mm.
can and should be treated because they can lead to scarring of the scalp, which is not something that most people like. So there's some different interventions, treated differently. But yeah, the same kind of genetic background hair loss that happens both in men and women, we kind of tend to do the same treatments for. There's some nuanced differences there, but definitely a lot of options.
Awesome. I'm going to switch gears on you before we wrap up. Something I ask most of my guests, and it's really around work-life balance. So, going into 2024, people are making resolutions. We talked before; you're not really a resolution maker, but obviously want 2024 to be a great year for you. What are ways that you're finding balance in between, you know, running a direct care practice, being married, having a 14-year-old son, and all the activities that go on with that? Like, how are you balancing it all, and how are you going to improve that in 2024?
Well, I did a very terrible job balancing it in 2023. So
Hmm.
particularly there at the end of 2023 when Between launched, having two businesses that kind of started about the same time, maybe I wouldn't recommend to most people. So I'm not going to call it a resolution, but I have in the last few weeks of 2023 tried to do some things to make 2024 a little more feasible where I could have a bit more of a work-life balance. So getting some additional help, having some things that I was doing myself that I could delegate to someone else. So doing that a little bit more. But yeah, I think it's always a struggle when you are an entrepreneur and you kind of want to be involved and it's hard to let go of some of these things. But on a day-to-day basis, I am preaching to people about taking care of themselves, eating right, getting enough sleep, exercising. And so I don't feel good about myself if I'm not doing those things. So yeah, for me, it's about delegating some things off of my plate because I actually enjoy all of those things. It's just I have to right now rely on somebody else to cook for me because I don't have the time to do exactly what I want. Or maybe I think I'd rather spend 30 minutes hanging out watching the TV show with my son than getting on the Peloton.
Mhm.
It's it's been hard, and that is definitely my focus for 2024. Is I gotta get back to doing more for myself.
I hear you. Yeah, delegation is a very common answer that I hear. Because if there was more than 24 hours in a day, I'm sure that you would go out and just handle everything yourself. But unfortunately, there's not. You've mentioned it a couple times. Getting a good night's sleep is important. So it's like to get everything done in, let's call it a 16-hour window, if we're going to get 8 hours of sleep every night, is very challenging. Running multiple businesses, having a family, doing the things
Mhm.
that we want to prioritize, but sometimes don't need to. Delegation, I think, is super important.
Yeah, and I have to say that I do have a lot of. My husband has been a stay-at-home dad since my son was born, so a lot of that part is off of my plate, which is nice. I don't know what my life would look like. I can't even imagine if him not being home was part of the mix as well. So yeah.
There'd be even more delegation. You'd be delegating that to someone else.
I'm giving a shout out to him because sometimes I forget to do that.
Hey, stay-at-home spouses deserve a shout out. My wife stays at home as well. Her job is 10 times harder than what I do. So
For sure, for sure.
100%. So that was work-life balance. Health and wellness is very important to you as well. I
Hmm.
mentioned it in your bio. I've went out on your website and looking at some of the things that are really important to you: strength training, hiking, all the fun things. How do you find a balance between health and wellness in the 16-hour days when you're trying to balance two businesses and a family? How do you also find time to eat right and to work out and to take care of yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I do kind of force myself to do the bare minimum of those things, but again, that's really part of making some changes this year is being able to do more of that. But there's some things that I've done that have helped that where I have some of these things that I can do at home, so like I don't have to go to the gym. I really love I think saunas are very beneficial for our health. I would love to say I've been able to pull the trigger on a cold plunge, but that is just not my nature. But I think those things are very good for us. And so I have one of these at home that I can hang out with the family and watch a movie and sit in. We like to call it the hot box, and I can get some of those good enzymes going.
There you go. Well, now I'm curious because as I look over here down here in our basement, I'm looking at our Therasage red light sauna,
Oh,
which we don't call it a hot box, but I mean it's definitely, you sit in that thing. There's a little chair. It comes up to your neck, so your head is out, but the
that's
rest
what
of your
I
body's in
have.
it. Is it the
It's
same
like you
thing?
look like a toaster. You look like a human
Exactly.
toaster.
And 20 minutes in that thing, and you're covered in sweat. But as a dermatologist, tell me a little bit about, and the listeners about red light therapy and how that's helpful for your skin.
Yeah, red light therapy definitely helps to reduce inflammation in our skin, may help kind of stimulate some things like fibroblasts to improve our collagen a little bit. Now, I think the home devices they're obviously less intense than
Hmm.
what you may have done, in an office setting with a more medically higher end device. But like these red light masks that people use, I certainly think they definitely have the potential to help. I think we'll see more and more coming out about those in the next year or so. Actual, maybe some studies with these home devices. But I think in terms of like the sauna, the science is definitely there that exposing your body to these extreme stressors, be it heat or cold, really increases its resilience to age-related processes. So I think it's, a no-brainer to try to incorporate some of those things.
Awesome. Fantastic insight. Well, before I let you go, give a shout out, your practice, where people can find you online, all the
Yeah.
things that people need to know. Where can they find the between line? Do all the promotion. Let's hear it.
All right. So my practice is in North Scottsdale, and it is called Brooke Jeffy MD because I'm very creative. My website is also very creative. It is www.brookejeffymd.com. You can all my contact information is there. You can schedule appointments online. I offer virtual appointments also in Kentucky. So do have that availability as well. Between can be purchased out of my office or on its website, which is www.meetbetween.btwn.com. I also am active on social media at Brooke Jeffy MD on Instagram and TikTok.
Awesome. Well, it has been a pleasure getting to talk to you today. I always tell people I try and learn something new every day. Obviously, getting to do these podcasts, talk with amazing physicians like yourself. I'm always learning something new today, and I certainly did in talking with you. So, wishing you nothing but the best in 2024, and I hope our paths cross at some point in the future.
Same. Thank you so much, Nate. Definitely a pleasure.
Yep. Take care.
Take care.